Good evening. Welcome to Headwaters. Last April at Apple Shop, we were glad to have as a visitor from Washington, D.C., Mary Marvin Breckinridge Patterson, a cousin to the founder of the Frontier Nursing Service. Back in 1929, Mrs. Patterson made a film for Mary Breckinridge about the Frontier Nursing Service.
But she wrote and asked if I would study 35mm professional motion picture photography in New York, where I lived, and then come down and make a film for her, which is what I did.
In addition to Miss Patterson, we also have interviews with Betty Lester, one of the first nurse-midwives to work for Frontier Nursing Service. Ms. Lester was from England and was also in the film in 1929.
Well, I don't know that I was exactly a star, but I mean, I was in it. And I loved doing it. It was fun. The whole thing was fun because we didn't have to tell anybody what to do. They just did it. I mean, we told them what we wanted them to do, and then they just did it. We didn't have any rehearsals or anything. We just did it.
So tonight's show is just a glimpse of one aspect of Frontier Nursing Service's long history.
Going down the railroad track, and I'm not a coming back, 'cause I'm 900 miles from my home. Lord, I hate to use that lonesome whistle blow.
This is the ford at Wendover. When I get to this point, I have to explain the uneven exposure. I had a camera that you had to crank by hand. You may have seen them in pictures. And my arm was so cold, I couldn't keep an even stroke.
Get up on you, my wife, and upon you, my king, and upon you, my diamond gold ring. If that train run right, I'll be home tomorrow night. Yes, I'm 900 miles from my home.
Every nurse had to go out some cold, frosty night. I know I did. I had lots of them, but we all, I mean, whatever the weather, if the man could come for the nurse could go back with the man. That was our slogan. Well, when a woman's in labor, she needs somebody. And you see, we were trained women.
Lord, I hate to use that lonesome whistle blow.
There was no electricity in the entire area except at our hospital and one nursing center. So I was fortunate to find a cabin where the man had taken the roof off to put on a new roof. And he had a 10-day-old baby, not a newborn, but that was as near as I could get to it. So this is the only way I was able to take a photograph inside a cabin.
Lord, I hate to use that lonesome whistle blow.
Since its foundation, when our area had the highest maternal death rate in the country, the service has delivered almost 20,000, and now it's over 20,000 babies, with the loss of only 11 mothers, and has not lost one in childbirth since 1951. And 95% of these deliveries were made without the aid or presence of a doctor. Mary Breckinridge was my father's first cousin, and she often used to stay with us as I was growing up in school in New York, and once she stayed with us in France. And when she came back after World War I, having taken care of French children, she had 10,000 she was taking care of in the area that had been overrun by the Germans. And then she trained in French nurses to take over, and came back thinking what to do with the rest of her life. She'd lost her first husband, who was a very wonderful person, evidently, and very happy. The second was not happy, but she'd lost her 2 children. In other words, she was completely free, and how could she spend the rest of her life usefully? And she was talking to us about her plans for coming down here. She loved Kentucky. She was a very devout Kentuckian. And she'd been up in this area once on a holiday to see what it was like, the holidays and the cabins and things. And the fact that it was difficult, there were no roads at the time. Everything was on horseback or a wagon It took 2 or 3 days for a wagon to get to the railroad at Hazard from Hyden, 2 or 3 days to get back. When we built a hospital, we had to import certain things. We had stone, we had lumber, we had labor. But other things, hospital equipment, had to be imported that way. We thought, if I can show that with a hospital and outpost nursing centers, you can give good care to remotely rural people, here, it could be done anywhere. And that's why she picked Leslie County, not a single road. No electricity, of course, no running water.
And how did you join her? How did you come?
Well, I was dying to help Cousin Mary. I thought it would be a wonderful adventure and a chance to completely contrast to my life in New York.
My midwifery certificate, my midwifery diploma is number 13. So I was the 13th nurse midwife.
And where is it from?
Well, we had to have the diploma from here. But I got my midwifery training in England. We all had to get from England, you see. And I got my nursing training and my midwifery training in England before I came out.
How did you hear about FNS?
Well, Mrs. Breckinridge used to send her nurses to England to get their midwifery because they couldn't get it over here. There weren't any schools. And one of her nurses came to the same school that I went to, and I saw the pictures of the horses and the dogs, and I thought, what a lovely life.
Where did the horses come from?
The bluegrass, most of them. They were. We didn't buy our horses. They were given to us because you see, people on the outside wanted to help us so much, and so they gave us all sorts of things. I mean, they gave us money, they gave us help with the centers and all that, and so the horses were given to us.
And they were
they all had to be, yes, they all had to be Tennessee walkers. Mm-hmm. We couldn't have trotting horses because if we had trotting horses, we used to every bottle would have been broken. So we were Tennessee walkers.
I was born in Tennessee. I recognize those horses.
Of course, you must have done. Yes, you would. That's a lovely gait they have.
Would you like to see the diary? Do you want to?
I'll just tell us.
Yeah. The 25th of May, dressed in riding clothes at the Lafayette Hotel and left for the mountains at 11:50, overnight train in a berth. Reached Krypton at 5:30 in the morning, had breakfast at Mrs. Eversole's with what they called coffee and with beaten biscuit. And we were met by a little boy, there was one other girl with me, and a horse and a mule to ride to Confluence. That was one of our centers. And there, we had to stay 2 nights. We were met by the nurses who lived there. It was a charming place, and they couldn't have been nicer. But the river was too high to go any further, so we spent 2 nights there. So it was 1 night on the train and 2 nights in the center. And the following day we rode on to Hyden for lunch and to Wendover to stay.
In the night, about 9 o'clock, I got on the train for Hazard. There was a Pullman on the train to Hazard in those days. There's not one now. And we came on up, and the porter called me at 5:30 in the morning at a very small wayside station on the way to Hazard. I didn't go right up to Hazard. And I got out of the train, and there was a mountain on one side and a mountain on the other side, and the road and a railroad in the river going through, and nobody there, not a soul in sight. And I thought, what have I done this time? What have I done? So then a man came along, and he took my bags, and I asked him where I could get breakfast, and he pointed to a gate in the fence, and I went in the gate, and I went up the path, and an awfully nice woman came onto the porch and said, looked at me, took one look at me. She said, are you one of Mrs. Breckinridge's nurses? Well, that made my day. I said, no, but I hope I will be. So she said, well, sit down. So I sat on the porch, and then I had breakfast, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. Nobody came. And I began to get a bit worried. And she kept on telling me, no, they'll be here for you after a while. So presently a nurse came along, and she was riding a horse and leading a horse. She took one look at me again, and she said, can you ride? And I said, well, I used to ride all my youth, but I haven't been on a horse for a long time. So she said, well, put these on. She gave me a pair of pants, and I put them on, and we started off. We went up the road, and we went up this mountain. I'd never seen a mountain like it in my life, with all these rocks and things around, and almost straight up. Then we got to the top, and we had to go down the other side, and I thought I'd go over my horse's head, but I didn't. Then we got to the foot of the hill, there was the river. And I wondered. And then she went splashing through the river, so I splashed after her. And the centre was not very far away, so I went up to the centre and I stayed there all day. And then the next day, a couple of couriers came down to get me, and I came on up to Hyden. It was a 12-mile trip, and it was 4 times crossing the river. There were no bridges, we had to ford. We came across the ford and got up to Hyden. When I got out to the door there, who should come out to meet me but the nurse I'd met in England? So that, another again, made my day. So then I went in and I started work. Well, it was a bit difficult at first because, as I say, the mothers didn't want the children to have needles stuck into them, and the children didn't want to have needles stuck into them. And then, of course, some people were stupid enough to say, it hurts. And that, of course, put the children right off. Well, we had to explain what it was all about because we'd had these terrific typhoid epidemics and smallpox epidemics and things, and we had to explain to them that we wanted to get them inoculated so that they wouldn't have these epidemics.
That little boy who said, "I'll be second if somebody else will be first," grew up to become a doctor, and he practices in Western Kentucky.
Be surprised how quickly they got used to having these needles stuck into them, and in fact they would tell us when their inoculations were due.
Oh, I enjoyed making the film. I rode 600 miles on horseback. On this engagement book I just showed you, I used to write how many miles each day, so I added them all up. And it came to 600 to make the film. Well, I got the stories from the nurses. They were all true stories.
Did you have other people with you to help?
Well, one time I had a courier who led the pack mule, but I did everything except the lab work.
Did people react to the camera?
Very well. You see, none of them had ever seen a motion picture. There was no electricity in the whole county, so they were not self-conscious, and that was a big help. And I gave them very general directions, like say, well, now you go over there and talk to Miss Lester, and they'd go, but I wouldn't say you go first and you stand 2 feet behind and that sort of thing. And some of the unexpected are some of the most touching in the film, I think, when somebody turns up in the wrong place, but it's so natural. And I tried to keep it that way. There were no costumes, no makeup, they just wore the regular clothes. And the only thing I told them was, please do not look at the camera. And they followed the instructions beautifully. They all volunteered their services. It was their way of thanking the nurses. They had no money. Well, they paid a small amount of an annual dues, but I mean, they couldn't help with the donations. And they did help very much by acting, and almost all the parts were taken by the same people to whom the things had really happened, except in the shooting scene. We thought that wouldn't be wise, to put the 2 men together. one having shot the other. But mostly there were true stories which I collected from the nurses and reenacted mostly by the same people.
Mrs. Patterson told us what she wanted to do, and we just did it, and that was it. And we went all over the place. You see, when Mrs. Breckinridge first came in, we only had this little place in Hyden. Well, then, of course, we spread out. She got the money for us, and we spread out. And it was at the centres and those, so Marvin could go to the centres. And there were always 2 trained nurse-midwives at every centre. Each nurse covered about 75 square miles.
Polly, pretty Polly, come go along with me. Pretty Polly, come go along with me. Before we get married.
Sometimes I ask people who are viewing the film if they were off in the woods, would they know how to make a stretcher? And I only found one woman who did. She works for public broadcasting. She used to be in the Peace Corps in Guatemala, and they learned how to do that, how to make a stretcher this way.
Polly, pretty Polly, oh yonder she stands. Pretty Polly, oh yonder she stands. With a ring upon her finger, lily white hand. Oh, we crossed over the mountains and the valleys so deep. Crossed over the mountains and the valleys so deep. That land pretty far.
Nobody got anything for being in the film, except that the stretcher bearers, who had a long trip at the end with the men who'd been shot, got a hot lunch at the hospital.
Oh, Willie, I'm afraid of your ways. Willie,
This is the point where my camera jammed. I had to sit down on the ground under a tree in a changing bag and take it out, while poor Miss Lester and the patient are there in the middle of the river, waiting for the camera to be functional again.
We got into the middle of the river, and her camera jammed. So we had to sit for about 15 minutes in the middle of the river while she got that camera, and she wouldn't let us move. We just had to sit where we were, and then when she got it on the jam, we came on. But I was in the boat.
Were you paddling the boat?
No, the men were doing that. No, I didn't. They knew so much more about it than I did. Everybody had a farm, and they grew their own food, their own vegetables and fruit, and grew their own corn, and they could take their corn to the mill and have it ground, so they had cornmeal for their cornbread, and everybody helped everybody else. I mean, it wasn't a case of, oh, I'm not helping you. I mean, it was a case, if anybody's house burned down, that people would all rally around and help them, you know. And then if they had to have a new barn put up or a new fence or something, they had a working, what we called a working. Everybody would come at daylight and start on the work, and the women would make a big meal, have a big meal, and everybody helped everybody else.
Being a woman in that situation, I mean, that must have been very, very strange and a real adventure.
Well, it was, but I mean, it was our job. It wasn't an adventure, I mean, it was our work.
Get the surgeon from Hazard who rides along the new road. It wasn't topped yet, but it was, at least you could canter or gallop on it, the only place I could find for a change of pace, and who operates. And then the end, Graydon comes out on the porch looking over Hyden. And as I tell people during the film, 2 years later, this same young man, Graydon, was shot dead. Again in a feud, was shot dead.
They threw little Dad over and turned to go home. Left nothing to eat but some small bird food and more.
Hugh lived in a cabin. He had glass in one window, too. And he had 2 children of about 12 and 10. And then his wife gave him twins. He was not attended by the Frontier Nursing Service, and the poor wife died.
There was no prenatal work and no postpartum. When she went into labor, she'd send her husband to get this woman, and she would come and stay with her, deliver the baby, and fix it up and fix the mother up, and go home, and that was all there was. And then the woman would be getting up on her second and third day to do her own work, which was really rather dreadful for them because it made them old before they should have been. But that was all they had. And then, of course, the maternal mortality rate was very high. Because, I mean, babies come. They've been coming since the Adam and Eve. But, and usually they're normal. But there are just a few times when they're not normal, when nature goes haywire. I mean, the woman may have a bad heart, or she may have albuminuria, or the baby may be lying wrongly. And these women, these untrained women, didn't know what to do for them, and consequently the mothers died.
And the twins just whimped and pined. And so he took them to the hospital to see if the Frontier Nursing Service, the nurses, could put them together again. And he rides first along the river and through the country, and each one has a little tiny infant in her arms, and his arms are her arms. And they drove the cow. He had a cow, and he brought the cow to pay for their keep. And he rode for miles that way and rode through Hyden, where driving the cow through other cows and pigs and mud was very typical of that era in this part of the world. One has to be brought up to date, but it's true of the time, and it will not be able to be photographed again because it doesn't exist anymore. The old hospital can be seen high up on the horizon. It has now become the school of graduates, Mountain Graduate School of Midwifery and Family Nursing.
Were malnourished. I mean, their mother had died and there was nobody to sort of take care of them. They were literally starving. And they came to the hospital and we took care of them. We kept them for months and months until they were really well enough to go home. And but there were that year I think we had 3 sets of twins who came in that same condition. And they all got better and they all got well, and they're all grown and married and got their own children now.
These twins had actually been in the hospital a month and had gained weight. They were skin and bone when they were first brought in.
loved doing the home visiting. Now, people don't do home visiting now so much. I mean, the home health people do, but they only go to the house to see one patient. Well, we saw everybody in the house. I mean, mother and the children. Of course, if father was home, he would sit and talk to us too. So we really kept, and then we kept very careful records.
The nursing records are very important. The data on maternity and medical cases in computer storage has been the source of valuable research studies by various agencies and healthcare specialists. It covers 58 years, 3 generations of a very stable population.
We had a special fund in those days, believe it or not. It was $5. And if they pay their $5 midwifery fee, we did everything that we had to do for them. Well, as soon as they knew they were pregnant and came to us to register, we did a prenatal examination. We took temperature, pulse, respiration, urinalysis, blood pressure, abdominal palpation, and the external measurements. And while we were doing that, we were giving them advice. And then we saw them every month for the first 6 months. And then the 7th and 8th month, we saw them every 2 weeks. And the last month, we saw them every week, so that we could keep entirely in touch. I mean, if anything went wrong, we would know what it was. And when the hospital was built, soon after the hospital was built, we had our own doctor, so we could refer any abnormality to him, and he would take care of it for us. Then we would go to the delivery, and then we'd wait 2 hours after delivery so that nothing would go wrong, that there wouldn't be any hemorrhage or anything like that. Then we'd see every patient every day for the first 10 days, and then for the first month we saw them every week. And then all the year we saw them every month. And then when they were toddlers, between 1 and 6, we saw them every 3 months. So weighed them, did everything for them. And then when they were in school, we had school clinics, spring and fall, and just take care of them until they became adults. And then we'd say, well, you can take care of yourselves now.